So for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing Black Clover, Sword of the Wizard King, a movie that is a spin-off of the popular anime series Black Clover, that is directed by, and I'm gonna butcher this person's name, Ayataka Tamimura, who up to this point has mainly been known for working as a key animator on some miscellaneous anime. Although as far as directing credits are concerned, he hasn't really directed too much other than 3 episodes of Black Clover along with a single episode of Devilman Crybaby. And the movie was also produced by Paro Studios, which not only produced the Black Clover anime, but also produced several popular anime from the past 2 to 3 decades. Everything ranging from Naruto, Bleach, Yu Yu Hakusho, Great Teacher Onizuka, along with the cult classics The Flame of Recca and Ghost Stories, or at least the English dub of Ghost Stories. The movie would get a theatrical release in Japan, becoming a massive success in the Japanese box office, collecting supposedly 45 million yen, which when translated to US dollars would be $318,000 from my understanding. However, when the movie would get streamed through Netflix worldwide, it failed to even make an impact on Netflix's viewing charts, getting the original Netflix movie treatment where the movie would premiere and then a few days later it would just fall off the face of the earth, not to be talked about again. And before I go any further with this review, I should probably talk about my relationship with Black Clover. For starters, I have never read a single volume of the Black Clover manga. And as far as the anime is concerned, I never really got into it because around this time period when Black Clover first premiered, I think it premiered sometime a little after My Hero Academia. In between the two animes, they had a very similar premise where the main character is born in a world where everyone has superpowers except the main character, but they would eventually get a superpower and they both want to become either the #1 hero or the Wizard King in this case. So on top of having a very similar premise but just set in a different setting, and between My Hero Academia and Black Clover, I was more interested in My Hero Academia than Black Clover. And to add on top of that, around the time of its release, I didn't hear a lot of people like the anime at the time, where between My Hero Academia and Black Clover, the first few seasons of My Hero Academia was praised to high heavens, whereas Black Clover was trashed on. But over the years, I've noticed there's been an interesting shift in the paradigm, where now it seems people have been trashing on My Hero Academia, whereas Black Clover seems to get a lot more praise recently. And I figured, since I've never read the manga and only seen 1 or 2 episodes of the Black Clover anime, and haven't really had the time nor patience to actually watch Black Clover, I figured give the movie a chance, since a movie is a lot easier for me to consume than a TV show. Not only that, but this wouldn't be the first time I've seen a anime movie based off a popular anime series without watching the series prior to watching the movie, with the likes of Cowboy Bebop the movie or Pet Labor the movie from 1989. And given that at the time I'd never seen the TV shows prior to watching either anime, I was still able to enjoy and understand those movies, which begs the question, can I watch Black Clover, the Sword of the Wizard King, and enjoy it on its own terms without watching the Black Clover anime? As for the plot of the movie, in a world where magic is everything, a young boy named Asta, who was born without magic, manages to get his hands on a 5-leaf grimoire which grants him the power to use anti-magic, and despite being exiled, decides to take part in a tournament to face his rival, with the hopes of becoming the Wizard King. However, before he's even able to clash with his rival, a new enemy appears in the form of a former Wizard King named Conrad, who not only manages to get his hands on a formidable weapon known as the Imperial Sword, but also has resurrected several previous Wizard Kings in order to destroy the Clover Kingdom and bring forth a new era where equality prevails by destroying all and reviving only those whom he considers deserving of a place in his new envisioned society. And now it's up to Asta and friends to join forces in order to prevent the previous Wizard Kings from enacting their plan. Can Asta and friends save the day, or will former Wizard King Conrad succeed in creating his new envisioned society? Now, in terms of what I liked about the movie, I'll say this much. The animation to the movie is really good looking. It's very pleasant to look at. It's very colorful without being too overbearing. And the animation done for a lot of the particle effects I thought were done very well. And when looking at the animation featured in this movie compared to screenshots from the animators do a good job of not only replicating the overall look and design of a lot of the backgrounds and character designs from the show, but it also looks a lot more refined here, given that this is a movie, and the filmmakers were probably given a much bigger budget here compared to the anime. So overall, I do think the movie has really beautiful animation going for it. To a point that I would say this is perhaps the best Black Clover has ever looked when comparing the animation here to the TV show, at least from my limited knowledge. Another aspect of the movie I liked is the relationship between the characters of Asta and Yuno, if I pronounced his name correctly. And before I go any further, as a reminder, I never read the source material, and I only ever saw the first 2 episodes of the anime, but from what I remember of Asta and Yuno's relationship, I do remember that they are the rivals of this series, in the same vein as Goku and Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, Naruto and Sasuke from Naruto, and Deku and Bakugo from My Hero Academia. However, unlike the rivalry between Deku and Bakugo, where it starts out really toxic, but then the two of them actually treat each other as proper rivals as that series progressed. I do like the fact that the characters of Asta and Yuno, despite them being rivals who are aiming to be the Wizard King, they at least have a very healthy rivalry in that sense where they both are not only friends, but they also do respect each other. And I do like the fact that that aspect of the relationship is carried through in this movie. Even though we don't really see the two of them interacting with each other throughout the entire movie, I do like the fact that they still have a healthy relationship from how I remember their interactions in the first few episodes of the anime. Another aspect of the movie I liked is the character of Noelle, at least what little screen time she does have. And again, as I said a few moments ago, I only ever saw the first 2 episodes of this show, so I was never really introduced to her as a character. That said, I think out of any of the characters seen so far within this movie, I found her character to be the most compelling of the bunch. And even though, from my point of view, this has been my introduction to her as a character, I know that before I even saw this movie, I just knew the iconography surrounding her and that she is the main female character of the series who specializes in water magic. Other than that, I don't know anything else about her. But then you get to the point near the climax where Noelle starts using her water magic against one of the kings, and she delivers this speech. And through that speech, I learned quite a bit about her as a character, in that she's basically meant to be a parallel to Asta in some ways, in that she's a failure who apparently had no idea how to use her own magic until she joined the Black Bulls. However, unlike Asta, who was an orphan, she hails from a royal family, but evidently through her time spending with the Black Bulls, she not only gained the ability to utilize her water magic to her fullest abilities, but she is also a noble who gained the ability to have empathy for the commoners. Not only that, but this also leads to one of my favorite moments in the movie, where sometime after a combination of her defeating one of the Wizard Kings she fought, and Asta uses anti-magic to neutralize the Imperial Sword, which resurrected all the other kings, there's a moment where we have, I want to say the character's name is King Ed or something. He's basically about to die again, and there's a moment where we see him collapse, and she runs towards him and kind of hugs him. It's only for a moment, but I do appreciate when filmmakers add these type of little touches to their characters. Now, as for aspects of the movie I have mixed feelings on, starting with the soundtrack, because the soundtrack is comprised by Minako Seki, if I pronounced that name right at all, who, much like the director, doesn't have too much in the way of credits under her name, although of the few credits they do have, she has done musical scores for at least 17 episodes of Black Clover, along with providing soundtracks for 3 other anime which consist of The Eighth Sun, Are You Kidding Me?, along with The Silver Guardian, and the last one being Kingdom. And no, I have not seen any of those other animes. And as far as her music score in this movie is concerned, it's hit and miss, because there are some bits of the soundtrack that I actually really do like. More specifically, the points of time where you hear either violins playing in the background or you hear organ playing. While other points of time, you have some bits of the soundtrack where it's so generic and bland that it becomes forgettable. Another aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on is King Conrad's backstory. Because on the one hand, there are a few points in time where the movie does some good visual storytelling where we periodically see Conrad touch this locket that's around his neck, and just based off the visuals, I was able to deduce that he decided to go down this darker path because he lost someone that was close to him, like a lover or a friend or something, which is mostly true, but the movie doesn't go any further beyond that for a majority of the movie. It's not till the final minute and 42 seconds where we have the current Wizard King give some exposition dump saying, well, the reason why Conrad decided to do what he did was because he was framed by a bunch of nobles from back in the day and they slaughtered his friends and lover and stuff. And I just thought that part right there was very poorly handled, because I feel like that information should have been addressed sometime earlier in the movie, such as the point when you have Asta Noel and one of the other characters enter this laboratory and you have one of the other characters that are giving exposition on Conrad. I feel like that would have been the appropriate time to bring up that bit of information, but they don't, because the only thing they do bring up is that, okay, the type of magic he has is this, which allows him to do that, and his death was faked. Which on the one hand, yeah, it has a tad bit of a world-building purpose to it, but I feel like if at that moment they revealed that, oh yeah, he was screwed over by the nobles, I feel like that would have made understanding his character a lot easier. Because I feel like by the time you actually do get to the ending where you do have that exposition being explained, it's just too little too late. Another aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on is the action itself. Because when the movie first begins, the action's actually not that bad, because the actual action scenes are at least kind of on the short end of the stick, which is something I'll be talking about later. But when you get to the final battle, the 4 congruent fights that occur are kind of a mixed bag, because of the 4 battles that happen concurrently with each other, 2 of them I thought were very engaging, while the other 2 I thought were kind of dull. The 2 that I thought were at least entertaining, or at least the ones that kept me interested, were the points in time where you had the characters fight against former kings Edward and former King Funnybunny. But the other 2 fights with the characters Conrad and Jester I thought were a little on the dull side, because my biggest problem with those fights are that they reminded me a lot of the type of fights you would see in an anime like Bleach, where you have characters flying around, clashing swords with each other, shooting laser beams. It just gets a little old and repetitive after a while, especially the final fight between Asta and King Conrad, because by the time you get to that point in the movie, I was starting to lose interest to a point that I just wanted to see the movie wrap up. Another aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on is the main villain himself, that of King Conrad. Because on pen and paper, I like what the movie was trying to do with him and have him be a dark reflection of Asta. I just think the execution of him was poorly handled. Now, in terms of what I disliked about the movie, pretty much everything else in this movie, from the narrative to the plot structure to the characters in some instances, there's a whole lot to discuss in terms of what doesn't work about this movie. Starting with a combination of both the plot and the plot structure. Starting with the plot itself, because, okay, let's be honest, when it comes to these movies based off a shōnen battle anime, the narrators are typically bare bones, where the plot structure usually goes something like this. starts, you have your main cast of characters interact or fight against a group of characters that were made exclusively for the movie, and the movie itself is usually glorified theatrical filler that's not based on any pre-existing source material, with the exception being Demon Slayer's The Mugen Train movie, along with Sailor Moon Eternal, which are movies based on source material, but with the case of a movie such as Black Clover, The Sword of the Wizard King, at least from my understanding, it's just theatrical filler. And this movie is quite literally that. It is just very bare bones, because that's all this movie is. It's nothing but one gigantic action scene after another. There is no sense of narrative to the movie. Even other shōnen battle movies usually have some sense of narrative structure to them that give you just enough plot threads to give you a reason for these characters to fight the bad guys. With one example being the second My Hero Academia movie, My Hero Academia, Heroes Rising. And although that movie is an hour and 44 minutes in length, let me break down how that movie utilizes its time to tell its story. And keep in mind, the numbers I'm about to spew are rough estimates, but within the first 4 minutes and 12 seconds of the movie, we get our first action scene that kicks off the plot to the movie. The next 44 seconds is the opening credits, where we get a narration from the main character, Midoriya, explaining the entire premise of the My Hero Academia franchise. The next 15 minutes and 43 seconds, we get set up for everything about the movie in terms of the world building, why the main characters are at this one particular location, the type of personalities and powers each of these characters have, the way they interact with not only each other, but the locals. Then we get our second action scene, which is 2 minutes and 7 seconds, which mainly serves as a better introduction to our main cast of villains in terms of their personalities and their overall objectives for the remainder of the movie, followed by a third action scene, which is literally 1 minute and 1 second, which establishes more geographical location that will be important later in the movie. Then for the next 6 minutes and 55 seconds, we just have a series of non-action scenes where we just have more characters interacting with each other. Then we get our first major battle in the movie between our heroes and villains, which lasts for 17 minutes and 44 seconds. After that, we have a non-action scene that goes on for 10 minutes and 56 seconds that deals with the aftermath of the first battle, with characters trying to help the locals to devise a plan to stop the villains and figure out what their goal is. Revelations are made, and then we actually see the characters plan for the final battle. And then you have the final battle of the movie, which takes up 32 minutes and 30 seconds. And then you end it with an epilogue that is 7 minutes and 54 seconds, which ties up a lot of the loose ends that had transpired with the events that occurred throughout this entire movie. And with that, you get to see just how My Hero Academia Heroes Rising utilizes its time to tell its story in regards to establishing the world, the setting, the cast of pre-existing characters, along with introducing new characters for the movie, and also provide us with a sense of stakes and urgency for when the battles do happen, and giving us closure to plot points that were established throughout the movie. Black Clover, The Sword of the Wizard King, on the other hand, does not do any of that. Because let me break down the plot structure to that movie. Because Black Clover, The Sword of the Wizard King is an hour and 15 minutes. And here's how the plot structure of that movie breaks down. In the first 4 minutes and 43 seconds, we get our first action scene, which mainly establishes the main villain of the movie. And then for the next 5 minutes and 12 seconds, we just get a non-action scene where we just have the movie trying to establish the setting and certain fractions of characters. And then we get into our second action scene, which is quite literally the first major battle with our main cast of villains. And this goes on for about 14 minutes and 30 seconds. And during that time, we do get a sense of what type of magic each of the villains use. And there are moments where we do focus on characters who are off to the side of the battle discussing something while the battle's going on in the background. But again, it's still all part of that one action scene. And then for the next 5 minutes and 2 seconds, we get a non-action scene that mainly serves as exposition dump for the main villain in terms of who he was and his significance to the movie, which leads into our third action scene that's 11 minutes and 14 seconds, which technically establishes the stakes and urgency of the plot, Then for the next 12 minutes and 30 seconds, we get the aftermath of that third action scene where we have the characters trying to gather their strength and actually form a plan to stop the bad guys, which leads right into the final battle, which, no joke, takes up 48 minutes and 49 seconds of the movie. That's quite literally half the movie is just dedicated to this ginormous action sequence. And then you have an epilogue that is about 2 minutes and 54 seconds. But even then, of those 2 minutes and 54 seconds, 1 minute 42 seconds is the actual epilogue to the final battle, whereas the minute 12 seconds is quite literally a post-credit scene of Asta and Yuno about to fight each other. And like I said earlier with My Hero Academia Heroes Rising with the runtime, I'm being very generous with the numbers for this particular movie, but you can see how drastically different these movies are in regards to how they decide to utilize their time for particular moments. Because despite both movies quite literally being, as some people would put it, big bombastic action fests, I feel like the time that My Hero Academia Heroes Rising uses is utilized a lot better in regards to telling its story as opposed to Black Clover, Sword of the Wizard King, where it has more time than My Hero Academia, but it doesn't feel like it utilizes its time to tell its story effectively. And I will admit, maybe comparing these two movies back to back maybe wasn't the best idea, given that with My Hero Academia Heroes Rising, I'm very familiar with that franchise since I have read the source material, I have seen the anime along with the movies, so at least I know what that franchise is all about. Whereas this movie, on the other hand, never read the source material, only seen the first 2 episodes of the anime, and nothing else. However, that all said, I'm going to bring up not one but 2 different anime movies that have spawned from a TV show. The movies in question being Cowboy Bebop, the movie, along with Pat Labor, the movie. Because before I ever saw Cowboy Bebop, the anime, I saw Cowboy Bebop, the movie first. And despite not having seen the anime, I still was able to enjoy and fully understand the movie on its own terms. Because it actually functioned in a way where you really didn't need to watch the show to understand the movie. With Pat Labor, the movie, on the other hand, despite not having seen the anime, I still was able to understand what that movie was about in regards to the way that world operated, the way the characters interacted with both each other and the world around them. Even when the movie threw in some characters for fan service reasons, I still got a sense of what those characters were about in regards to how they functioned within the narrative. With this movie, on the other hand, in order for this movie to properly function, you needed to have at least watched the entirety anime that came before it to have a better understanding of what it's really about. So it doesn't really hold up on its own 2 feet. With My Hero Academia Heroes Rising, even though that movie takes place sometime after Season 4 or midway through Season 5, I still feel like the way it uses its time to tell its story in regards to establishing or re-establishing plot points for the anime, I still feel like that movie can still function on its own because it tells you just enough information about how that universe works and how the characters interact with each other. It does a better job of establishing the stakes for the movie. Another problem I have with the movie is the character roster, because my god, this movie has a really massive character roster balanced out, and I just don't think the movie's runtime did any of these characters any service. I mean, sure, you had certain characters have their big moment, but I feel that we didn't really have enough time to spend with these characters to really appreciate those moments, say for a character like Noelle. And here's the thing, I just counted the amount of characters that appear in both this movie and in My Hero Academia Heroes Rising, and here are the numbers. This movie has a grand total of 40 characters, whereas My Hero Academia Heroes Rising has a grand total of 43. Now, of those 43 characters that are featured in Heroes Rising, we only really get to focus on 25 of them, because the other 22 are just glorified cameos and function as such. Whereas this movie, on the other hand, technically it actually doesn't focus on that many characters, since it only focuses on maybe 5 to 7 characters who actually have the most amount of influence of the movie, whereas everybody else are just glorified cameos, and again, function as such, but the movie feels like it doesn't really balance out all of these characters properly, to a point that some characters get so little screen time that I honestly forgot they were even in the movie until they show up again at the very end. For example, one of the captains, I do not know his name, but he wears like this kind of green outfit and has like these elbow blades, and he's kind of crazy, and he only shows up for maybe 2 scenes, and then he just, again, like I said, completely disappears for the remainder of the movie because we're focused on several other battles, because the battle he's taking part in is not the most important. So I feel like a better way this movie could have utilized its larger cast is maybe instead of trying to have all these characters fight for screen time, maybe it should have focused on 14 to maybe 18 characters. That way you really could have balanced out all of these characters' personalities and interactions with each other in a way where you could still understand what these characters are about without having to watch the anime prior to this. Because I feel that the only reason why I was able to understand Noelle as well as I did was because the movie did take some time to really establish what she was all about in regards to her backstory, but even beyond that, we get to see how she is integrated in the movie itself in terms of how she interacts with the environment around her. As it is, the movie just felt way too overcrowded to a point that I really didn't get a chance to properly know all of these characters. Another problem that I have with the movie is a plot point that's established within the first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie, where we have some of our characters talking about the main character, and they talk about the fact that he's been exiled, and this is the first and only time this cast of characters ever bring up that detail, and it has so little relevance and impact on the narrative as a whole to a point that I think you could just remove that line of dialogue and nothing about the narrative would have been affected. If anything, I just have questions about the main character being exiled, in that sense of, alright, why is he being exiled? Who exiled him? And how does this affect the plot? Of those 3 questions, the first 2 are not answered, and it has no bearing over the story whatsoever, to a point that you could have removed that line of dialogue and nothing would have changed. Now, sure, there probably is explanation in terms of why the main character was exiled to begin with because of events from the TV show, but as someone that never saw the TV show, I was kind of hoping that maybe they want to brought up a bit more detail in terms of why he was exiled in the first place, and I feel like they could have maybe used that information to add more tension throughout the movie when you had the main cast of characters not fighting the bad guys, where you saw a group of these captains interacting with Asta being like, you're technically not supposed to be here, and you kind of see tensions rise between certain characters, and then ends the movie with Asta going back into exile. I feel like it would have utilized that plot point a little better, even if it is just bare bones at best. Another problem I have with the movie is the lack of explanation behind really anything, because this movie is running under the assumption that you're someone who either has read the source material or seen the anime, so you will probably understand the general gist of how this world works and who these characters are. But again, as someone who had never read the source material and only seen the first 2 episodes of the anime, there's still a lot of texture to this movie that I really don't understand in regards to what the setting is, how does this world operate, how many squads are there, who's in what squad, and what is their significance within the context of this franchise, resulting in a movie that's not holding your hand. Because, again, like I said a few seconds ago, the movie is under the assumption that you're someone who either has read the source material or has seen the previous seasons of Black Clover. Or, if the movie does explain anything, it goes by so fast, it falls into the category of blink and you miss it. For example, there is literally a point in time where we actually do see King Conrad resurrecting one of the former Wizard Kings with the Imperial Sword. However, it is so brief that I didn't even notice it the first time I watched the movie. It wasn't until my third time watching the movie is when I actually noticed it, along with several other little scenes that actually do explain plot details, but again, they're so short and brief that they're literally a blink and you miss it kind of deal, which is a very big problem when your movie is more focused on having big bombastic action sequences than trying to tell a story, even if that story in question is already bare bones to begin with. Another problem that I have with the movie are the conversations that Asta has with the main villain, King Conrad. Because, no joke, it's the exact same conversation repeated multiple times throughout the entire movie without anything new whatsoever. Seriously, the conversations they have in this entire movie can be summed up like this. I must destroy the country. No, don't do it, but I must. No, you can't. Nobody can stop me. Yes, I will. I'm about to kill everyone. I'm gonna stop you. Rinse, wash, repeat. That's literally the extent to the type of conversations Asta has with the main villain of the movie. And it's so goddamn repetitive that it really does bug the ever-living hell out of me. And for the final problem that I have with the movie has to do with the climax. And when I mean the climax, I mean the literal final battle between Asta and King Conrad for one or two reasons. Reason number one, I'm not a big fan of the decapitated army cliche. And for those of you who don't know what that is, if you're familiar with Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, or the first Avengers movie, it's where you quite literally have an enemy army that seems pretty unstoppable until the main heroes take out the thing that's controlling the army, which leads to the disabling of forces. This movie pulls that by having Asta use his anti-magic to nullify the sword that allowed King Conrad to resurrect the other three kings, leading to some anticlimactic moments with a few of those characters. The second reason, after that was said and done, you think, alright, maybe this is the point where the movie is going to wrap up, but no, King Conrad had an ace up his sleeve, and it's just one of those things where it just kept going for an extra 3 to 4 minutes, and that's an extra 3 to 4 minutes that honestly did not need to happen. Honestly, I could keep going, but I think you get the point. So for my final verdict of Black Clover, the Sword of the Wizard King, the phrase I'm about to use is something that some anime fans have used in regards to another anime called Demon Slayer, which is story's nothing special, but the only thing that makes it special is that it's carried by its animation. That's how I feel about this movie. Because on the one hand, yes, this movie has some really beautiful looking animation, aside from some wonky CGI effects here and there. And while I did find the character of Noelle to be very compelling in the short amount of time she was on screen, and while there were definitely 1 or 2 fight scenes that I was definitely very engaged by, everything else about the movie was very lackluster. Story was non-existent, pacing is all over the place, and the movie has way too many characters to keep track of to a point where you don't really get a sense of who each of these characters are through this one particular movie, because the movie doesn't really do a good job of establishing who is what character. Now sure, you could chalk it up to the fact that I didn't do my research properly by watching the entire TV show that came before this, but here's the thing. With Pat Labor the movie, I never saw Pat Labor the anime, but I saw the movie first, and I was still able to enjoy it, really understand that movie in a way where I actually thought it was a pretty good movie, to a point that I don't really think you need to watch the TV show to get the movie. This, on the other hand, is a completely different ballgame. Overall, Black Clover, the Sword of the Wizard King, is a standard battle shōnen anime movie in the worst way possible. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Black Clover, the Sword of the Wizard King? So the movie got a surprisingly good reception. And so for my final rating of Black Clover, Sword of the Wizard King, I give it a 2 out of 5. So should I have watched the anime before watching this movie? And see you later.